The beginning of the third meditation contains a very helpful summary of everything that Descartes has done up to that point, and then also what he's going to do after that point. And so the beginning of the third meditation really contains a good kind of overall account of the whole project of the meditations. And so if you're trying to piece together all the pieces that you find in the meditations, and you're having trouble with it, the first few paragraphs of the third meditation is a good place to look to try to piece everything together. So, what he says is something like this: Look, I called everything into doubt. We had that deceiving God hypothesis. Who knows what's true anymore? Well, in the second meditation, I argued that while I cannot be sure that, say, my hand exists or that the sun is there outside or anything like that, I can't be sure about those things because, after all, this deceiving God could be deceiving me about them. And I can't be sure about, 2 plus 2 equals 4 for the same reason. Deceiving God might be deceiving me. Nonetheless, I can be sure that I exist. And so that's one thing that I can put into. We're starting to build back up this edifice of knowledge. There's our foundational brick. I exist. I think. The way he puts it in the third meditation, I am a thinking thing. Third and second meditation, he puts it that way, right? And so this I think, I exist, the cogito, that's our foundational brick that we're going to lay as we start this process of building back up human knowledge, right? That's going to be the foundation for human knowledge. He also says, and he says this in the second meditation too, I can also be certain about the fact that certain things appear to me a certain way. So even if I can't be certain that my hand is actually there when I'm looking at my hand, even if I can't be certain about that, because after all, the deceiving God might be deceiving me, nonetheless, I can be certain that it appears to me that there's a hand right there. And I can be certain that it appears to me that 2 plus 2 equals 4. It might not, in fact, equal 4, and my hand might not, in fact, be there. But nonetheless, I can be certain about the kind of contents of my mind that certain things appear to me a certain way, right? Okay, so that's another thing he adds here. Now, for all that, however, Descartes hasn't really given us much of a foundation. He is trying to show us, he is trying to give a foundation for physics, for math, for all of the other sciences, for physiology, for astronomy, for biology and chemistry and everything else. He's trying to show the foundations for those sciences, how those sciences are actually justified, and why we can be confident that they are true and why they will be stable and likely to last, right? He's trying to give us these foundations. And while he's started building back up now, it's entirely unclear how he could possibly justify, say, physics on the mere fact that he exists. The cogito, while arguably it escapes the deceiving God hypothesis, seems far too meager, far too slight to really establish anything substantial on. Right. So, how is Descartes going to pull this off? Descartes is aware of this, right? He can't really establish, for example, that momentum is conserved or something like that, or that mass is conserved in interact or whatever physical principles. How you can't establish anything like that on the basis of the mere fact that you exist. So, how is he going to pull that off? Right. The cogito, while interesting, doesn't really seem to do the trick. It's very slight, can't really establish anything on top of it. So, what Descartes does in the third meditation is he kind of pivots. He engages in what people call the extraction argument. Descartes attempts to extract what people call the truth rule from the cogito. So the idea is something like this. Descartes, at the beginning of the third meditation, considers the cogito. He considers what he had done in the previous meditation. And as he's thinking about it, he thinks, well, you know what made the cogito so great? It was the fact that I vividly and clearly perceived it. That's what made it so great. Well, hey, doesn't that show me what's required for me to be certain about anything? Namely, that I just need to vividly and clearly perceive it? And so Descartes extracts from the cogito this thing called the truth rule. Descartes doesn't call it that, but this is what people who write about Descartes, who read Descartes, who think about and talk about Descartes, this is what they call it, the truth rule. And the truth rule says that whatever I perceive very vividly and clearly is true. Whatever I vividly and clearly perceive is true. That's what the truth rule says. And so Descartes attempts to, or what he does is he considers the cogito, considers what made it such a kind of great thing, if you will, what made it so great. And he says, oh, I know. It was that I vividly and clearly perceived that. And again, we saw that last time. We saw Descartes saying in the replies to the objections that you intuit the cogito. And intuition and vivid and clear perception are the same thing for Descartes. And so now, here in the third meditation, he's saying, well, maybe that's a general rule that whatever I perceive vividly and clearly is true. And if it were, well, that rule is not meager and slight, because Descartes thinks we can vividly and clearly perceive a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, all of mathematics can be vividly and clearly perceived. And so if we can establish the truth rule, that will give us all of mathematics, right? If we can put the truth rule into our edifice of knowledge, we can build all of mathematics on top of that. But not just mathematics. Descartes in various places seems he suggests that certain laws of physics, conservation laws and so on, can also be vividly and clearly perceived. And so certain aspects of physics could also be thrown back onto our edifice of knowledge if we establish the truth rule. Now, I keep putting this kind of conditionally, if we establish the truth rule. There is, of course, a problem. So Descartes extracts the truth rule from the cogito, but then he immediately reminds himself of the situation he's in. We're assuming that there's a deceiving God, an all-powerful evil deceiver. And so that hypothesis raises the worry, how do I know that the truth rule is true? It'd be great if it was, because then we'd get all math, we'd get some of physics and so on, right? And we'd really be off to the races in terms of reestablishing all of human knowledge, okay, and in setting out these foundations for the new science and so on. But how do we know that the truth rule is true? Maybe this deceiving God is just deceiving me about it. Maybe whenever I vividly and clearly perceive something and I think there's no way this can be false, maybe that's just the deceiving God deceiving me. Maybe it is actually false, and the deceiving God is simply putting this feeling of certainty into me. And so, in order to establish the truth rule, we need to eliminate the deceiving God hypothesis. That is to say, in order to validate the truth rule, in order for us to legitimately place that brick, so to speak, into this reconstructed edifice of knowledge, we need to prove that there is not a deceiving God. That's Descartes' strategy. And he's going to do this by not proving that God doesn't exist. He doesn't think that that would work, actually. He is going to do this by doing two things. First, he's going to prove that God, in fact, does exist. So he's going to prove that God exists. And then he is going to prove that God is not a deceiver. And so Descartes' method or strategy, I should say, Descartes' strategy for validating the truth rule to make it such that we can accept it, to justify it. His strategy for doing that is to eliminate the deceiving God hypothesis by proving that God exists, but that God is not a deceiver. This is really, in certain ways, the heart of the project. Because if he can pull this off, well, then he's off to the races. Then he can establish pretty much, then he's got a legitimate claim to establishing the rest of human knowledge. So in the third meditation, what Descartes is going to do is he's going to spend the vast majority of the meditation proving that God exists. And at the very end, it kind of follows straightforwardly from this proof. He's then going to prove that God is not a deceiver, right? And then if we do that, we'll have validated the truth rule, and we can throw that into our edifice of knowledge. Descartes' not so clear about this by the time he gets to the end of the third meditation. He doesn't go back and say, and so look, now we validated the truth rule. But that is what he is doing in the third meditation. That's why he's proving these things.